Welcome to Running Up the Score. I am Alex Kennedy. Yesterday was the NBA trade deadline. Kind of anticlimactic, but we want to talk about everything that went down, what didn't go down. Who better to help me do that than my good friend Michael Scotto from HoopsHype, the first guest ever on this show and now making his return. I have to say, too, before we get into everything that went down yesterday and talking trade stuff, Mike's one of the most respected and connected NBA insiders in the business. I've been at multiple different events, NBA events, Summer League, G League Showcase, and I swear, every time you're hanging out with Mike, every 2 minutes, someone comes up and wants to talk to him, is dapping him up. So I had to bring him on just because I feel like you're very tuned in, always talking to executives and agents and players. So let's help me make sense of what happened yesterday. Sure. On one hand, I kind of understand why we didn't see a ton of trades because we had so many big moves happen in the last few months. You had, the Siakam trade, OG trade, Harden trade, even looking back to last offseason, Lillard, Beal. I mean, a lot of like the notable names that we would have been looking to get traded. It happened already. If they had all happened yesterday, we'd be talking about this as a crazy deadline. But because they happened earlier, it was mostly role players that happened yesterday. Before we get into specific trades, what was your overall thoughts on the deadline as a whole?
Well, first off, I appreciate the kind words, Alex. And as far as the deadline overall, I would say it kind of went the way people thought it would. Like you said, it wasn't going to be the huge like superstar guys. The only all-star that maybe could have gotten moved was DeJounte Murray, and he didn't. I'm sure we'll talk about him specifically later because he was a notable trade candidate. But overall, it pretty much went the way I thought. I think you're seeing how the play-in is affecting some teams and the way they're positioning themselves, whereas in years past, maybe more teams would have been more sellers. I think that was an issue too. You didn't see a lot of sellers this year. And that actually included Washington as well. I think some thought that maybe they would sell a few more guys, and they had trade candidates in Kyle Kuzma. They had Tyus Jones, DeLon Wright. Daniel Gafford got traded. But for the most part, I think the deadline went the way everybody thought it would.
I want to get to winners and losers in a second, but speaking of DeJounte, I think there was a lot of buzz in like the 24 to 48 hours before the deadline. The Pelicans popped up and a number of teams started, entering the DeJounte sweepstakes. And part of me felt like it was unlikely he was going to get traded just because they gave up so much to get him. So it's tough to turn around not too long after and trade him away. You're kind of comparing it to the haul that you already gave up. But what kind of happened with that DeJounte situation? Why do you think he wasn't moved?
I mean, simply put, the Hawks weren't getting the 2 first-round picks that they wanted. And that's less than what they gave up originally for him when he was coming off an all-star season in San Antonio. And so for a lot of the chatter centered around 3 teams really before the Pelicans kind of came in there a little bit and expressed some interest. Obviously the Lakers were the number 1 team. And I had touched on this on HoopsHype about they were willing to offer D'Angelo Russell, Jalen Hood-Schifino, and their 2029 first-round pick. Now, what was interesting with Hood-Schifino was they were marketing him essentially as the second first-round pick to kind of fill that quota for Atlanta. However, Atlanta took Kobe Buffkin before Jalen Hood-Schifino, so that was an issue. Number 2, D'Angelo Russell, Atlanta didn't want to take back, and they didn't want to take him back in part 2 reasons. 1, they didn't feel like he was an ideal fit next to Trae Young, certainly, who's their point guard. And 2, that you look next season, he's got an out-player option, which a lot of people think, or at least projecting as of now, that he will exercise. And so that would be more money on their books. And Atlanta's looking to shed some salary if they tried to, I should say, and, be away from the luxury tax. Now, with that said, they can wait until the offseason around the, more closer towards the draft and over the summer to achieve that objective. But they weren't getting more than 1 first-round pick to my knowledge. The other teams that were kicked around were the Brooklyn Nets, the New York Knicks. Now, the Brooklyn Nets had Spencer Dinwiddie's expiring contract, which, would have appealed to Atlanta, but only 1 first-round pick, and it was going to be protected if anything, and so that didn't appeal. The Knicks, they toyed with it more around the time that they were looking to upgrade the roster, and they ended up getting OG Anunoby. And then there were still some in the front office that debated it if they can get him on a buy low cost, which they ended up getting, in my opinion, a guy on a buy low, and Bojan Bogdanovic we'll touch on later. But as far as DeJounte, the Pelicans did have some interest, but it was a little like too late and complicated, I think. Not really the ideal parts that were needed to get something done of that magnitude. But I do think they're a team to keep an eye on down the line. And if something were to go down there, I don't think it's just for DeJounte. I think you got to look at Onyeka Okongwu or Clint Capella as a big man going back, because Jonas Valanciunas is going to be an unrestricted free agent. And we have to see if New Orleans feels that it's going to be able to retain him going forward.
I'm curious, were there any other notable players that were being discussed, or like big name players that, maybe could have been moved, but ultimately the deal didn't get done, or guys that maybe we should like focus on as the offseason approaches? Because it feels like there's not a whole lot of situations. Again, I rattled off all the situations like Siakam, Dame,
right.
Beal. Those were always the star players or big name players that were being talked about, but now they've all been moved. Who's kind of on trade watch next?
I mean, I would say Kyle Kuzma was a name, because he's got a great contract looking up that descends and declines in value. He was sought after. And I think for the Wizards, this is going to end up being a long-term rebuild. And while he is still valued there, anytime that you got a guy that's coveted by a number of teams, it could drive the price up and make it worthwhile. But there's no rush for Washington to have to move him. I think that was the difference. And I always feel like a bigger trade of that magnitude, with the exception of a new owner taking over in Phoenix and really wanting to make a splash in Kevin Durant, a lot of times you're going to see the huge star guys get traded over the summer, and sometimes maybe early in the season like we saw Harden, because it's going to take time to acclimate those guys. So I'd say for that, I'd look at Kyle Kuzma down the line, and he was a guy that they had some offers for. They just didn't feel that it was enough at this point.
Yeah, I wrote an article for ESPN about all-stars who've been traded mid-season. And since 2010, only 7 all-stars have been traded. And 3 of them were the Brooklyn trio, Harden, Kyrie, Durant. And that was an odd situation where, they basically had to blow it up and guys were disgruntled. So it is pretty rare. Let's get to winners and losers. Let's start with winners. You can give yours first. I have 3, and I'll let you go first.
I have one clear winner, and it's not even close, the New York Knicks.
Yep.
I thought they might have arrested Leon Rose because he stole Bojan Bogdanovic and Alec Burks. I mean, you talk to executives around the league, that was the prevailing thought, because Detroit had better offers last year. And I think Troy Weaver even touched on that in a presser today. But to me, the Knicks getting Bojan Bogdanovic, a guy that could score 20 points a game and is a knockdown shooter. Alec Burks, who Tom Thibodeau loves. They have a great relationship, and he plays defense, which is obviously important. They've been looking to fill that void for Emmanuel Quickley, and I think that Alec Burks is a guy that's going to be able to do that. So to me, I just thought they were it was so clear to me that they won. That's all I could even focus on. As far as, well, when you say to me, who do I think is a winner? I thought they crushed it.
Yeah, they were my number one. I think by far the Knicks are the biggest winner. I was surprised that they didn't get, the Pistons didn't get more for Bogdanovic, because we had heard his name in trade rumors for like 2 or 3 years now, probably 2 years. And the rumors, there was always reports about their asking price, and, they really should have traded him last year to get the best return. But for them to be able to, basically get him for what they did and kind of sneak in there and get him and Burke, someone who's already familiar with, the system and everything there. They look really scary now going forward. I'm excited to see what they can do. Obviously OG's out right now, but once they're at full strength, this team's going to be a ton of fun. So I think they really helped themselves. And even there are plenty of contenders that could have used Bogey that, I'm surprised they didn't get in there and try to beat that offer. But maybe.
Well, you know what, Alex, to your point, if you're another team that wanted him, I feel like you got to be scratching your head or kicking yourself saying, how did we not beat this offer?
It's crazy to me. I mean, unless Detroit is just like really high on Quentin Grimes or something, I don't understand how you don't beat that offer. Not only so you can get Bogey on your team, but also to prevent him from going to this New York team that now looks really deep and talented. Like the Knicks look very, very scary right now, and I'm really excited to see what they can do in the postseason. The other teams that kind of stand out to me as winners, the Phoenix Suns. I think, given the limitations and kind of where they were at, they really went all in on this trio, and they were a luxury tax spender. So with the new CBA, they wouldn't really be able to go out there and add big names through the buyout market. Guys who are making above 12.4 million, the non-taxpayer mid-level, they were barred from being able to sign those guys. So, if this was under the old CBA, maybe they just go out there and they try to sign a Marcus Morris or a Joe Harris, guys like that, they get bought out. But that's not possible this year. So they went out and they were aggressive, and they were able to bring in Royce O'Neal, David Roddy. I think they made their playoff rotation stronger. I think they improved their depth. So I like that move for them, kind of all things considered. And then I like what Dallas did too. I think being able to go get Daniel Gafford and PJ Washington, I guess you could question what they gave up, but I don't know.
That's where I was going to get to you on that, but I'll let you finish your point first.
I think I might be higher on Washington and Gafford than others. Maybe I think Gafford, he just turned 25. The athleticism's there. He still has untapped potential. Washington has played well. And I think that front court now looks better, and they improved their depth. I think both of those pieces fit really well. What do you think about the return?
I mean, Gafford, I get the point there. I mean, obviously him and Derek Lively are going to be a two-headed center monster now. A lot of people called on Derek Lively, but Dallas wasn't looking to move him. To me, though, with PJ Washington, it's not the contract. I'm not worried about that, and I do think he's going to play significant minutes. But to give up a top 2 protected first-round pick so far down the line,
that is scary.
Scared. Like when I looked at that, my eyebrows were raised, and I thought, well, you're obviously giving up on Grant Williams very early after just signing him to a 4-year deal.
Yeah.
And that speaks to, well, would you make the move in free agency for, one, and two, I just think like, I was surprised with the compensation. I really was just surprised by the compensation aspect. Like I know that Charlotte was trying to get a first, but my understanding was like Rashawn Holmes was in that talk first, and then that didn't work and he got moved elsewhere. But to make it only top 2 protected for PJ, I thought it would have been like, I don't know, top 10, maybe even
That's
lottery
fair.
protected. And that's what really surprised me. But obviously, they're going all in to try to be better this year. And, like quietly, you want to get the most out of this team while you got Luka Doncic under this contract. And we've seen, Alex, even though a guy's locked in long term, that doesn't mean anything. It takes 1 second to have a trade demand leaked and totally turn things upside down. So they want to win and be competitive. I just thought, if anything, maybe they'd even wait until the summer when they'd have more picks at their disposal, including that pick, to really make a splash. And that wasn't the course they went.
That's fair. I do wonder how much of it is. There was the reports, I think, last offseason that they were worried about Luka and him being disgruntled or becoming disgruntled and kind of putting pressure on the franchise to go make moves. So I think that probably factored in a bit as well. I'm curious, who were your biggest losers? I'll start with mine. I don't understand what the Bulls are doing. I thought they were going to be a seller. And I think if you were a team like the Bulls that had multiple veteran pieces that you could have given up, this was the year to kind of step up and sell because there were so few sellers out there. So a guy like Alex Caruso, DeMar DeRozan, obviously, I think Vooch, his name wasn't really out there a ton, but they could have moved him. They had a number of pieces that they could have made available. And I think we've all seen enough of the Chicago experiment to understand that it's failed. Like they're not going to be a team that goes like on a deep playoff run, much less contend for a championship.
Once Lonzo got hurt, I mean, that really, to me, like it was such an unfortunate thing because with him, they were like arguably a top 4 team. And this is years ago, but they were arguably a top 4 team. And now it's like, you don't know if Lonzo's going to play again, let alone if he's ever going to reach that level. So to me, you're fighting a deficit. And, they've tried to add a point guard to kind of make it work. Now, Kobe White's come in and played well for them. And but here's the thing, Alex, I think to your point, even with Kobe White playing well at that position, that's kind of been underwhelming for them. It's still not generating great results. And so at that point, clearly like this unwillingness to sell that, why is that? Because we've seen in years past, you're down in the Florida area. And years ago, the Orlando Magic did exactly what you suggested. And they got rid of Vooch, they got rid of Aaron Gordon, they got rid of Evan Fournier, and they rebuilt. And management sold it on ownership. They got extensions. And then the rebuild picked up and got steam. They're doing better now. And they got an extension again. And so I almost wondered if that would logically, I've always thought that should be the move for Chicago. But there just seems to be this stance of not going that way and rebuilding. I don't think Chicago has the appetite for that after they went through it for a few years. And, whether that's ownership driven or not, I don't know. Right. But ultimately, DeMar DeRozan, really good player, not getting any younger. Vooch, same thing. Not good, really good player, not getting younger. And so it's like you're kind of stuck in this middle ground, and it's not where you really want to be in the NBA right now. So they've got to figure it out, I think, over the summer sooner or later, because right now you're looking at the play-in at best.
Right. I think the ceiling for this team is a play-in team. And I don't fault them for the Zach LaVine situation. I mean, you could blame them for the contract that was given, but, I understand that the market for LaVine isn't really there. And then obviously he has a season injury on top of it. And so, I don't blame them for not trading LaVine, but there's other pieces on that roster that were appealing. Even like Andre Drummond, there was a lot of rumors about Philly and other teams looking at Drummond. There was like 4 players on that team that they could have sold and gotten back young players, picks. I think the Orlando comparison is really interesting.
Point. I forgot about Drummond in a sense of like when you're talking about all these top guys, and then you mention him, he could have. There were teams that made offers. I know that.
Yeah.
And they passed on him. And it's like, is he going to be brought back next year? Like what? I don't know.
It just feels like they're fine being a play-in team. And you're right. There's always more behind the scenes and like more factors that we don't maybe know fully. Like maybe this is ownership driven. Maybe I think part of it too is their asking prices were so high. There was a report, and I forget who reported it, but that the Bulls wanted like an OG level offer for Caruso, and they wanted multiple first round picks for Caruso. And if that's true, that's crazy to me because he's 31 years old. And part of the appeal with OG, obviously you can compare their perimeter defense, but OG is so much younger and has way more untapped potential. And the thought is he can expand and, play a bigger role in New York. Whereas Caruso, he's going to be a role player and like a defensive specialist wherever he goes. And he's almost 32 years old. So like, if I'm the Bulls, I would have blown it up and I would have traded off a number of those guys and got back picks. And like you said, kind of position yourself for the future rather than being stuck in the middle of the pack.
The bigger thing I'd say, Alex, is the market has shifted back to normal. Yeah. And what I mean by that is Rudy Gobert completely threw the market out of whack, completely. And now the market, I feel like it has reset. And when you talk to other executives, they would agree. And I think that's why, for example, DeJounte didn't get 2 first-round picks. Neither did Alex Caruso. Dorian Finney-Smith was another guy that was talked about. He didn't move. And so, the role guys for multiple seconds you can do. But it's the starting caliber guys or those 6-man type guys. The days of, I feel like the market's corrected itself again, and where it's you're not overpaying for those guys. And draft picks are now more important, especially with the new CBA, the apron rules, and the buyout rules, as you touched on earlier.
Yeah, I think you're right. The CBA definitely has an impact as well. The only other loser I can think of, just like NBA fans in general, because we didn't get a ton of fireworks and big trades. Like, there are some deadlines that you see a lot of big trades and everyone's excited and Twitter's, a buzz. This felt like pretty anticlimactic and kind of a bummer. But again, we've had some
earlier on, like you said.
Yeah, even like a Terry Rozier trade that happened in late January. There were a number of other trades. Marvin Bagley. I'm thinking of there were a number of trades that happened earlier in the season. So it led to the deadline being a bit of a dud. But those were my losers. Is there another loser that kind of stands out to you?
Yeah, I thought the Detroit Pistons, because I just thought, and I say that because of the Bojan Bogdanovic factor. I was shocked that they weren't getting a first round pick of any kind with him in there, because they did have offers last year for that and more. Whether it was a first and 2 seconds or a heavily protected or 2 firsts with the second one being heavily protected, that probably would have converted to multiple seconds, but it didn't happen. And they waited too long, and now you saw the return they got back, and they've obviously got a lot to figure out. I mean, they're selling obviously the young guys: Cade Cunningham, Jaden Ivey, Jalen Duren, Isaiah Stewart. And the hiring of Monty Williams, as you know, well, we got a coach, but it really hasn't translated this year, respectfully.
Yeah, I think that's really fair.
And last thing, Alex, they cut a lot of players, and I believe it added up to about $40 million, if not more. Like when they're waiving guys, obviously Joe Harris was one of them, but you look at the total sum, and it's a lot of money.
That's true. Yeah. What did you make of guys like Killian Hayes and James Bouknight getting waived? I mean, I think it's a testament to how they've kind of struggled, the fact that they couldn't get anything back. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, Memphis was in trade talks with Detroit, but they didn't want to give up any real second round draft compensation, and they turned out to be right. He didn't go anywhere, and now for Killian, I do think he needs a fresh start. He needs a chance where he can play. I do think he'll get picked up eventually. There's some teams are going to see a kid that can pass the ball and defend, and it's always like, well, if he works on his shot and he gets his shot improved, then you got a really nice player there. But that's a big if, and he knows that he needs to work on it as well. As far as James Bouknight goes, I'm not sure what the future holds for James. Obviously, Charlotte had high hopes, but it wasn't the right fit, and I really don't know what his market's going to look like going forward. For James, he's going to really have to get into a situation where he can get a chance to play, and I don't know where that is right now. You'd have to go to a lottery type team and something of that sort. But out of the two, I would expect Killian to get picked up first.
Yeah, I agree. They're both so young that I could see a team talking themselves into okay, well, they still have a lot of untapped potential. Maybe you tell yourself they were kind of in bad situations. So maybe a lot of teams I've heard executives be like, well, in our situation, we can get the most out of this guy. We have the right veterans or coaches or leaders or resources to kind of help this guy kind of figure it out. So yeah, I mean, it sucks for both of those guys, obviously, but I agree. I think Killian's going to be probably more highly coveted than James. I'm curious, before we get into breaking down some of the specific trades, when you look at the buyout market, again, first year with the new buyout rules, it's a little bit different. For people, we kind of touched on it earlier, the Suns have 2 open roster spots, so they could be active in the buyout market, but again, they can't go after the Spencer Dinwiddies, Marcus Morrises, Joe Harrises, because those guys were making too much previously. Right. The Bucks, Celtics, Clippers, Heat, Nuggets, and Warriors are in the same boat. What are your thoughts on kind of what we'll see on the buyout market? Maybe some players that could pop up.
Sure. I mean, right now, Alex, first guy I'm looking at is Spencer Dinwiddie. I'm looking at him to pick between the Dallas Mavericks and the Los Angeles Lakers for where he would go next. Obviously, he played well with Dallas when he was there, so there's some familiarity there. And he was recently at Dallas's game at Madison Square Garden in the stands, which I thought was interesting timing. And as far as the rest of the market, I mean, I do think the Suns are going to look for a front court piece. Who they get, I'm not sure yet, but given the trades and the losses of Yuta Watanabe, Chimezie Metu out of the rotation and the trades that they did, I could see them making another front court move. And usually front court guys aren't as expensive, especially centers on the buyout market, or even like a 4. So I would look there. I do think Danilo Gallinari is going to be a very coveted player as well for his shooting at the stretch 4, and he's played a little bit of even small ball 5 as well. Could a team talk themselves into Joe Harris? I saw Casey Johnson of NBC Sports Chicago talk about him maybe as a possible candidate. I thought that was interesting. Because Chicago could use shooting, and Joe has provided that over his career, but he had a limited role in Detroit on a rebuilding team. And so Joe's a great locker room guy. I do expect him to get some interest in a team to see if they can take a shot on squeezing some more out of him and his shooting. Other than that, I'm sure there's others. It's just like been a whirlwind.
Do you think Kyle Lowry is going to hit the market?
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Yes, Kyle, I do. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk about Philly. That's been something that's, somewhat been in the back of his mind, I would say, for years, even from when he played in Toronto. And, they could certainly use the help now. We saw them get Buddy Hield. And I think for them, they realize that they've got to try to hold down this fort while Joel Embiid is out, hoping that he can come back and still salvage this year. And they've been lacking a little bit of scoring, obviously, without Joel. So they figure, all right, let's go get Buddy Hield. He's got a year on his deal. It doesn't tie into the cap space that they have going forward. And you take a shot. Again, a guy that didn't get a first-round pick back. So it was a worthwhile thing to move a bunch of seconds for him and kind of go from there. But, yeah, certainly Philly's been talked about ad nauseum for Kyle Lowry.
Yeah, I feel like Lowry to Philly makes sense. And I feel like Hield made a lot of sense for Philly too, just in terms of, they needed shooting, spacing. Yeah. I mean, they're hoping Embiid can come back, and I think he fits well, when they're at full strength. One trade we haven't talked about, Gordon Hayward to OKC. There were some rumors about a Hayward buyout maybe. There was talks about, maybe him going back to Indiana. Obviously, OKC is, I think, the second youngest team in the NBA. So getting a veteran who can come in and help not only on the floor, but also in the locker room, off the floor, I understand that thinking. And for what they gave up, it feels like a nice flyer. I mean, his issue has been injuries, obviously. He hasn't played, more than 50 games in each of the last 4 seasons. So he's missed time consistently. What were your thoughts on Hayward to OKC?
Honestly, I was a little surprised because he's like the old man in the room.
Yeah.
They're a pretty young team. And I don't know if that was like the position I thought that they would go given the depth that they had. But I think it's also a shot for them to have a guy who's been experienced, been in playoff situations, and a good locker room guy that they could take a chance on. Big picture, I'm curious if he's a guy that they bring back next year, and depending on what that number is, do you then maybe look at him as a future trade candidate? And again, I'm thinking way down the line. But Sam Presti has so many assets in his treasure chest, and I just wonder in the offseason if eventually this will be one of them or not. But for now, you take a flyer on a guy with proven playoff experience, and we'll see what he can do. But he's a good guy to add to the locker room for OKC, so they thought it was a worthwhile venture. And they've got so many draft picks that their cupboard is overflowing, so I don't think they really cared about that.
I feel like one team that everyone was talking about, I mean, we always talk about this team, but the Lakers,
Sure.
There were people wondering, were they going to move D'Angelo Russell? Would they try to make a play for a DeJounte Murray? It felt like they were being attached to a ton of different names, which is always kind of the case. But why do you think the Lakers stood pat? And what do you kind of see going for, what do you see this team doing going forward?
Sure, Alex. I think a couple things. One, with DeJounte, they couldn't get that done. That's what they wanted to do. That was their number one target. Bruce Brown was number 2. However, for Bruce Brown, they would have gave up that 2029 pick. Bruce Brown, within the Lakers, I don't think they thought Bruce Brown was the difference maker for them getting to a championship this year. And so bigger picture, again, in the summer, when they have more draft picks available in the future to move, and they're going to look to do that to get another star caliber player there, it wasn't worth it at this point. And I'm sure Laker fans don't want to hear that, but ultimately for the Lakers' big picture, if you really want to put yourself in that championship conversation, it's about who's that other star guy that you can bring in, at least in their mind. And, they've been linked to a bunch of people. They always are. They always will be because they are the Los Angeles Lakers. So bigger picture, it makes sense. And also, I'm sure they wanted some clarity on LeBron's future, and that wasn't going to happen at this point. And I'm sure LeBron wanted them to make a splash or do something, and that didn't happen either. And ultimately, we'll see where it goes down the line. But I will say Anthony Davis has played really well this year, and I think he's gone. I think it's gotten a little underrated, and I think recently he's gotten this rap as like, you know, a guy that's always injured and this and that. He's been playing through injuries, and I just think that's something that should be noted. I think that too many people haven't thought about that recently.
No, that's fair. You mentioned the Magic are in my backyard. I live right outside of Orlando. So I'm curious. There were a lot of talk, you know, there was a lot of rumors about would the Magic try to go after a Tyus Jones or try to upgrade at, you know, point guard. Markelle Fultz, I think, after they drafted Anthony Black and extended Cole Anthony, there's been people wondering, you know, is he the odd man out? You know, he's played well at times, but obviously he's had injury issues and things like that. And then they've had two guys that really, I think Jalen Suggs has really played well this year and went from being a guy that was kind of on the bubble to now, you know, is close to untouchable, or at least it would take a whole lot to get him, I would argue, just because I think they kind of view him as like the heart and soul of that defense, and they love what he's shown. Maybe untouchable is a strong word, but it would take a lot for them to part with him. And then lately, Jonathan Isaac's playing really, really well coming off the injury. And he's obviously played well, you know, throughout his career. It's just been the injuries that have really limited him. And, you know, can he kind of get back to being a guy that can play, you know, 30 minutes and play back-to-backs and stay healthy for a long period of time? What do you think of the Magic not making a move? And we kind of talked about it earlier. They're positioned really nicely going forward with this young core. Do you think eventually we'll see them try to make a splash, or what are your thoughts on kind of where they're doing?
Yeah, big picture, I'm looking towards it this summer for the Magic to be in the mix, whether it's free agency, trades, because they're going to have a really good handle on what their core is with Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner and the guys around them. They're going to have enough time to decide who works, who doesn't. I do expect them to be more aggressive. They've been patient for a while, and it's been a prudent approach. Now it's time to go add to that core and take that next step. Because right now you're looking at them as a playoff team, okay, or at least at like very worst a play-in team. But you know, they have a shot to be a top 6 team if they can get back to the way they were playing at the beginning of the year. So for me, that's kind of what I'm looking at. Summer, they got to be more aggressive and make some move, whether it's in free agency or a trade. And I think that I'd like to think that's coming. I know a lot of people around the league certainly see it coming, but they also toot to the beat of their own drum. So we'll see.
Talking to a lot of like Magic writers, I think the perception or the thought process is let's make the playoffs, see what happens in the series, get our young guys some experience, but then really that will kind of tell us what we need to do and, you know, expose some weaknesses, and we can kind of go from there. I don't think there's any question they need to add shooting and spacing, just because this team, not only do they not shoot the ball very well, they don't attempt very many threes. So that's going to be something they try to address, I'm sure, going forward. But last question for you. I believe it was The Ringer, and Kevin O'Connor wrote about Trae Young and whether we could see the Hawks look to move Young instead of DeJounte going forward. Sure. I think he mentioned Orlando, San Antonio, Brooklyn. Like, there's teams you can kind of talk yourself into. Like, okay, they have the picks or the assets to get it done. They have a need at that position. There's a number of teams that, you know, you could see putting together kind of like a big offer for a Trae Young. When Sam Amick was on, I think it was 2 months ago, he had said that the new front office and everyone there was really committed to Trae and didn't want to move him. Okay. What are your thoughts on kind of the Young situation? And like, could we see him be available at some point, or do you think he's kind of there to stay?
As of now, right after the trade deadline, I think that's more speculation than reality as of now. But it's something that it's a plausible speculative suggestion that could make sense, but I haven't heard it to this point yet. I'm not ruling it out completely.
Yeah.
I haven't heard it yet.
Well, and a lot can change between now and the end of the season, so we shall see. But, you know, DeJounte staying through the trade deadline, I'm sure in the offseason, those kind of things will start bubbling up again. Like, okay, well, who do they move? Does it
all this trade deadline did, Alex, was set up you now have a barometer of what it's going to look like in the offseason. That was the biggest takeaway I got from the dedeadline.
Yeah,
it's all about 6 months from now, maybe not, however many months it is, towards the offseason and who's looking at who, and you have your barometer and your early footnotes, cliff notes, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah, no, it definitely sets up the offseason to be pretty interesting, and we shall see what happens. Thank you always for joining me. I appreciate it. It's always fun chatting rumors and trades with you. Appreciate you.
You got it, brother. Anytime.
Everyone, make sure you're following Michael Scotto at Mike A. Scotto. As I mentioned, super connected, does a great job, not only with articles and everything for HoopsHype, but also he's a must follow on Twitter. Breaking news left and right, tons of rumors. Right before the deadline, I loved your notebook, by the way, where you went through literally every single team and broke down kind of what they were looking to do and different things you were hearing. So if you're not following Mike already, you absolutely should be. And if you guys want to hear more episodes of Running Up the Score, check us out on Twitter, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere you listen to podcasts. And until next time, thanks for watching.